When application completion rates drop, something is off. Students aren't getting the support they need, and that's affecting your numbers. Enter Element 451's AI assistants. They step in where students struggle, offering real-time answers and advice, guiding them through every step. Learn how AI assistants can boost your enrollment outcomes. Visit element451.com/AI team to learn more.
This is Knocking at the College Door, Projections of High School Graduates by the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, WICHE, or as I've never heard another human pronounce their acronym, so I'm going to call it WICHE.
Yeah, so I get confused about that because that's the way you spell niche or niche with an N. So, and people pronounce that differently. So I feel like we're math guys. Why are we even trying? That's the question.
Welcome to the Edu Data Podcast, a podcast that serves as your weekly guide to the data driving higher education. We are your hosts. I'm Jamie Boggs.
And I'm Timothy Davis. Join us every Friday for weekly breakdowns of the most important data, trends, and topics in higher education.
The Edu Data Podcast is a part of the Enrollify network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at Enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below.
Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.
Welcome back to another episode of the Edu Data Podcast. Jamie and I, just before we started recording, were breaking down why the SEC and the NCAA, how they need to be reorganized and basically solving all of those problems, mainly for the benefit of Kentucky.
Yeah, Kentucky does not belong in the SEC for football. So that's just a hot take. They're an ACC school. It's built like an ACC school. You know, I found out at the ACC championship that SMU, which is in Texas, is in the Atlantic Coast Conference. So we need to just start everything over.
I agree. I mean, I think that we could really make college football something and not make it just an SEC show that everybody else kind of gets to participate in every now and then. But I digress. We digress because in this episode of the Edu Data Podcast, we are going to cover one of probably the most in-depth and impressive research studies that I think we've covered on this podcast. This is Knocking at the College Door, Projections of High School Graduates by the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, WICHE, or as I've never heard another human pronounce their acronym, so I'm going to call it WICHE.
Yeah, so I get confused about that because that's the way you spell niche or niche with an N. So, and people pronounce that differently. So I feel like we're math guys. Why are we even trying? That's the question.
I think we might need some help in the comments section how to pronounce WICHE, the acronym for the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. And they might even have a preferred pronunciation that I've yet to find on their website. But
it's not on this study for sure.
That's right. And it doesn't need to be. The study is very exhaustive, as we will get into, but it covers the projections of high school graduation rates for all 50 states and the District of Columbia, so the entire United States. And this particular version of the study, which they do every 4 years, this particular version projects out to 2041. And so today we're going to look at some of the key findings, their website for this, which is included in our show notes here. We're going to cover some of their key findings that you can also find and follow along with on their website or through the downloaded report. We're also going to get pretty deep into the technical appendix, which is just one of the things we were really nerding out about before we started recording here. But the key finding that I've been seeing a lot of folks share about on LinkedIn and how I was originally made aware of this study is the geographic location key finding that shows that there are going to be up to double-digit declines in some states, with Hawaii being up to 33% decline over this period in high school graduates from 2023 to 2041. And regionally, The only region in the United States that is projected to grow is the South, and that is only by 3%, where we see the West declining by 20%, Midwest by 16%, and Northeast by 17%, respectively. Jamie, what are your thoughts on that? Is that kind of line up with your initial impressions? I know we kind of like to do our initial takeaways, our initial reactions to some big data.
And when you see this laid out linearly, I do think it's a bit shocking. We talk about the enrollment cliff being, I don't know, essentially coming right now, like in the next couple of years. When I picture a cliff, I picture a drop off and then it continues. This study is showing a drop off and then you roll down a really steep hill. So I was a little surprised at the continuous decline for the next 18 years.
That's right. I mean, only 10 states are projected to grow beyond 2025, which makes 2025 really the peak year, or the year of the cliff, if you will, that we've been talking about for all of my career, right, and certainly even before. So a couple of the states that are projected to grow, Texas, hand over heart. Texas is in there. Florida. I'm located in Texas. Tennessee's in there. South Carolina's in there. North Carolina's in there. DC is in there. Delaware's in there. And so those are some of the states that are really contributing to keeping the South above a 0% or above decline. But some states, like I think I mentioned Hawaii at the top, they're seeing negative 33% change over this period. Other states, like big states like New York, down 27%, California down 29%. So some of the really big players with lots of institutions in the region. I mean, Northwest has tons of institutions and is seeing a 17% decline. So this is a big deal. This is a big projection that's going to have a lot of implications across both K-12 and of course higher ed as executives and cabinet members and admissions professionals and enrollment pros make their projections and try to figure out the best strategy for moving forward. But is there anything related to the regional, like the geographic location here that stood out to you? Or is it
not necessarily, but I think this is related. I would have expected the populations by ethnicity to follow a similar path, but if this projection is correct, it in some ways is going to turn DEI kind of on its head. Whereas a sharp decline in Caucasian students, down 26%, multiracial students between now and 2041 up 68%, and Hispanic students up 16%. Every other group is decreasing, but I think it just shows the growing multiracial population is bound to happen if you have an area with many different races. But that's going to, I think, change the landscape of what the college campus looks like. But that group growing as a percentage of the class, not necessarily growing in raw numbers, which could some, but certainly the folks that we're focused on now, for the most part, are going to, and again, these are projections, but continue to grow as a greater population of enrollment.
Yeah, we'll kind of have to continue to monitor that through line and see how that changes year over year with some of the other reports that come out. That a lot of the reports we've covered have focused on the particular obstacles that students of color, Black students, Hispanic students face as they try to make their way through college. And so, yeah, that'll be certainly something to keep an eye on, especially as a multiracial student population grows. But the multiracial student population really peaks in like 2034, where we see like 100% change year over year from now 2024 to 2034, 100% growth in multiracial students. But even multiracial students start to fall off percentage wise between 2034 and 41. And that brings them down to, even though they're still up from 2024, they're down from that high point at 2034. So Hispanic students really the only ones that are staying pretty level, 16% growth, and that's kind of a gradual line growth. Not many drastic anomalies and like the peaks and troughs of that line, but I think that's kind of interesting as we might expect to see continued immigration into the United States from countries to the south.
Right.
So yeah, a lot there.
And the questions that raise for me are, first of all, how are we coming up with this? How are we looking at the numbers to say the decline is going to be a cliff and then a hill How are we saying regionally is going to project in this way? And all of those questions were answered pretty thoroughly by the math that was used to make these projections. And they've been doing this since 1979. They didn't just wake up a couple of years ago and start studying graduation projections. This has been going on for a while. So the model has been evolving over time, and there's so much that goes into it. So I don't even know where you want to start with this, but they provide this complete technical guide that is in and of itself 8 pages.
Yeah. I mean, when we start talking about projecting the future and, looking into the crystal ball, I think it's, we get our headlines for sure. We get our kind of key findings and stuff that we want to talk about on social media and on LinkedIn. But hey, like at the end of the day, I think it's important for everybody to understand how we're actually making these projections. And while it might seem a little bit intimidating when you see like the actual algebraic formula on the page, I think that the WICHE team, WICHE team, has done an amazing job at breaking down their methodology, at how they think about this problem and how they calculate these projections. And yeah, that's part of the technical appendix. If you're on the homepage of the report, you can find it by hovering over kind of the secondary menu. Like on their website, they have this kind of secondary menu that's just for knocking at the college door. And if you hover over the first item on that, which is the 11th edition, at the bottom of that menu, there should be the technical appendix. It's linked on some other pages, but it's called the technical appendix. And yeah, as Jamie said, it is 28 pages long, where they talk about how they collect data. They kind of show some example data tables. They show their 5-year weighted average cohort survival ratio formula. And they also talk about the impact of COVID-19 and how they thought about controlling for some of the anomalies in that year. But again, I guess the first thing that will jump out to you on page 1 is figure A1, the 5-year weighted average cohort survival ratio formula, spelled out right there for you. And they kind of step you through some of the different variables that are part of that formula. But that's the main projection formula that they're using, is that cohort survival ratio. And they talk a little bit about why they decide to do that. There are lots of different projection methodologies, but the two main reasons that stuck out for using CSR, cohort survival rate, is because it's often used within the industry, especially in K-12, and also because it requires less data input, so like less data overhead. You can, of course, get much more granular. And so, of course, we have plenty of dimensions that are of interest that are missing from this report, but collecting those at the national scale gets really, really difficult. And so the CSR is kind of an apt methodology to continue to use year over year with the data that we have available and our ability to collect that data. So I think that's a really smart choice by them. And of course, they give some great logic behind that decision there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
The data going into this is fairly extensive as well. You talked about not needing the overhead, but they put in data on birth and birth rates, enrollment numbers for grades 1 through 12, because kindergarten's not exactly as hard-lined as the other grades. The numbers of graduates, high school graduates in each state year over year. So they are not just looking at birth rates to say who's going to be of college age in 2041. They're looking at everything. They're saying, how are rates changing? You're basically using time series data to look at this over the course of time. And they have a lot to account for. And those are things that anytime you're doing this analysis, that formula is huge and complex, but the things that it's actually doing make a ton of sense. You're looking at trends over time. You're looking at seasonality. If you're looking at graduations, maybe they're at different times of the year. And then cyclical patterns, which aren't necessarily seasons, but they may be a greater period of like 4 to 5 years or what have you. And then to filter out the noise, to get rid of the random anomalies. So the model, I wish they wouldn't have put it on page 1, because it is intimidating and it might make some people stop reading. But it's thorough, and it all is very purposeful.
Yeah, and it's also important to understand where this data is being sourced from. The primary data source for public education, for public school enrollment and graduation data, is the National Center of Education Statistics, which a lot of people reference. It is a division of the U.S. Department of Education. But they also factor in private schools. And for that, they use, and I'm scrolling to find it now, the Private School Universe Survey, which is conducted by the NCES as well. So it's all kind of NCES data, but from a couple of different reports that they publish throughout the year. And most of the time, these reports are published at least once a year. For public school data, it is. The Private School Universe Survey is published biannually, so seeing it every 2 years, but combining that together to kind of get a full picture.
Any study we've talked about, I always have the question of how is COVID and the pandemic accounted for? And they outline that specifically in this appendix document, talking about how they don't take that data out while, yes, numbers were reduced for enrollment and graduation we're in the middle of a pandemic, a global pandemic, right? That the ratio that they're looking at, that survival ratio, was unchanged during that time between those that were 12th grade enrollment and graduation. So they do account for those little pieces that I always have questions about that nobody ever really spells out. So they get super granular in the way that they are breaking things down.
Yeah, and I mean, they also gave a really good example when talking about COVID-19 of other situations where they have adjusted and tried to sort of smooth out the final projection numbers. Because, when you look at the 2020-2021 school year worth of data, that throws that entire cohort way off. And since we're doing 5-year sort of rolling cohorts, it affects the entire projection pretty much out through the 2030s. Again, they kind of spell out how they decided to normalize that. But the other situation that they bring up was in 2016, when there was a change to the way that the Department of Education in some states started storing race data. And so that being one of their key groupings is kind of threw off the projection numbers by those different races and and ethnicities. And so they adjusted for that as well to kind of keep the numbers normal as more data was collected.
And the thoroughness here. I mean, that's the first time they've adjusted that piece of it since 1997. Before that, the data that they were getting did not disaggregate the data by ethnicity. So everybody was together. 1997, they were finally able to break out the ethnicities and those subgroups, and now they're updating that. Again, the historical context they're giving here is fantastic. They get their birth rates from the National Center for Health Statistics and Prevention, which is part of the CDC. So they're using that data, which again accounts for, they go in depth into how they evaluate the pandemic data. So in a lot of ways, the model accounts for some of these things because there is that anomaly detection and removing error in a lot of ways. And a lot of times when you do these time series models, you'll put something alongside it. For example, you could just put college searches alongside graduation data. And if college searches raise and drop, then you're kind of saying, oh, well, that's not a trend. That's just what was going on in society at the time, or it's not impacted by what was going on here because we know this other thing was impacted as well. So you set it side by side to make sure that what you're seeing is what you're really seeing and it's not attributed to something else.
Yeah. I think the final thing that we can kind of wrap up talking about, which is, again, another thing that I don't think I've ever seen in another study, is on page 22 of the technical appendix. They have figure A3, and it's over time, the projections track reported total high school graduates. So basically, they're showing actual results against their projections and against each edition of their projections starting at the second edition. And you can kind of see how they have been able to predict and what their predictions have been versus what actually happened. I think the only major variance came with the 9th edition, which would have been around where it was predicted to sort of decline at that point in 2012 from the 9th edition, but actually rose up through 2020. So, all that to say, since kind of the 2012 to 2020 period, the actual population, actual data has been above projection data, where the 10th and the 11th have started to adjust for that. So really, really interesting to see how the projection stacks up to what
I love the transparency of that, but also the fact that this allows me to trust their model because, yes, it's had some error, but overall it's been really strong. So I love the fact that that's included as well.
Absolutely. Well, a couple other things to point out about this publication as we wrap up. Again, they've got a great website here that you can kind of tick through. They do have the ability to toggle through their like interactive dashboards published through Tableau. So you can kind of apply your own filters and really see their different key finding dashboards, plus build your own charts. So basically use the underlying data set to build your own dashboard using their kind of embedded Tableau interface. So definitely check that out and consider this study as you make your projections, as you make your planning for the next several years.
Very thorough. I was just as excited about the methodology and the fact that we get to see behind the curtain as I was about the actual findings. But obviously, the findings are of great interest. So make sure you check that out. But give yourself a little break and look at the fun math stuff. Just skip over the intimidating formula and then ingest the fun.
Yeah, they do a great job walking you through it. So, okay, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up on that one. For Jamie Boggs, I'm Timothy Davis. Thank you again for joining us for the Edu Data Podcast. We'll see you in the next episode.
The Edu Data Podcast is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month. We've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional.
Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Jamie Hunt, Artis Cadu, Dustin Ramsdale, Jeremy Tiers, and so many of your other favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.